Yes, sir. Please continue, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. So this session is on access methods, that is specifically NOMA, that is non-orthogonal multiple access, and a new thing called grant-free access. Okay. Uh, so this is not attached to any particular standard, unlike the first session where everything was attached to LTE. This is not attached to any particular standard. Of course, I'll give some insights into how these particular technologies are being standardized as such. Okay, so let's begin with NOMA. First thing is, I would like to acknowledge Professor Zhigua Ding. So actually, if you simply Google for NOMA, I think you will get at least some 100 papers having Zhigua Ding as one of the authors, because he was one of the first people to do NOMA. And of course, Professor Robert Schober, who often collaborates with Professor Ding. I was able to meet Professor Ding in person, and when he gave a talk about NOMA, he ended up sharing all this material with me. And this was also a conference, a workshop in IEEE International Conference on Communication. So most of the slides here are taken from that presentation. So after I share it with you people, I kindly request you to not share it with anyone else. Please keep it to yourself, because this is for personal and professional use. So I am treating this as professional use and I'm sharing it with you. So kindly keep it to yourself. You can print specific pages and give it to someone, plus, but please don't share the entire set of slides. Okay. Okay. So let's start with what is multiple access and why do we need it? Obviously, multiple access means multiple users want to access the same network. It can be either in the downlink or in the uplink. So in the downlink, base station wants to send simultaneously, it wants to send different data to different users. In the uplink, different users want to access the same base station at the same time. And why do we need it? Because we don't have infinite bandwidth. We have limited bandwidth. I have to share it with existing users. So I have to come up with some access mechanism to share it with these users. Okay. And of course, there are multiple users and we need to separate these users somehow. So that's why we need multiple access methods. So traditionally, we had only three types of multiple access. Okay. Time division multiple access, where you separate users in time. Frequency division multiple access, where you separate different users in different frequencies. And code division multiple access, where you have different codes to separate the users. They can occupy the same time, the same frequency, but their codes are different. Okay. And whatever we studied in the previous session, FDM, OFDMA and SCFDMA are all just variants of this FDMA itself. That is, they are still separating the users across frequencies. Okay. So now, what does this mean? This means that if I use TDMA, each user getting his slice of time might experience some delay. Some may get it at the beginning, some may get it at the end, and so on. So TDMA is bad in terms of the latency it may offer. FDMA is bad because, okay, it will not offer any latency because all users are accessing at the same time. But what its limitation will be is obviously the bandwidth, because I cannot keep on creating multiple smaller frequencies if I have limited bandwidth. And code division, it doesn't have these two problems. It can occupy the entire bandwidth, it can occupy the entire time, but the biggest problem is how will I generate so many orthogonal codes? So as we all know, if I want to generate more and more orthogonal codes, then basically the number of bits required to generate that code, or the length of that code, increases if the amount of orthogonality has to be increased. That is, you have to have more number of orthogonal codes, means the length of each code will be very high. So these are the main limitations of the existing methods. Okay. Of course, this I already discussed. OFDMA is an improved version of FDMA, and basically it has this bandwidth saving sort of characteristic, because I can, whenever one carrier goes to a null, the other peak, the other go to a null. Okay. So that can, because of that, we can closely space the subcarriers, and we can also avoid interference and save bandwidth. This we already know. Okay. Now, all these methods are what we can term as OMA, orthogonal multiple access methods, because in at least one of the domains, you are orthogonal. In TDMA, you are orthogonal in time domain. What is orthogonal? What you do at this time does not impact what some other person does at some other time. So in time you are separated, or in frequency you are separated in FDMA, or through code you are separated. So in all these you are orthogonal in at least one domain. Okay. Now there is a big problem with this. Okay. Let's take a simple example. Let's say there is a user who has a poor connection to the base station, and there is another user who has a good connection to the base station. Okay, let's say I have separated them in frequency domain using OFDMA or FDMA, anything. I'll take a very simple system. These are the only two users in the system. I gave half of the bandwidth to this user, good user, half of it to the bad user. What will happen to the overall system? It will be inefficient because you're not making use of the system in an optimal manner. Sorry. So I think I unmuted by mistake. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Okay, thank you. So but in terms of fairness, I have to still provide this user some service. I cannot tell you you are a poor user, your channel is bad, so I won't provide you any service. I cannot do like that. So there is always a trade-off between the achievable throughput and the user fairness. So a poor user will bring down your throughput or the spectral efficiency, which is bits per second per hertz that you can send, but you have to serve him if you want to maintain some sort of a fairness. Also, the amount of orthogonality is limited. That is, in time TDMA, number of time slices are limited. FDMA, number of subcarriers are limited. CDMA, number of codes are limited. If you want to support more and more users, it becomes very difficult. So to give an example, with all our IoT advent of IoT and all, at a given point in time, you might have 1,000 users trying to access, but you may not have 1,000 subcarriers or 1,000 codes. Okay. So that is one big disadvantage of OMA. That first disadvantage is throughput and fairness. There is a trade-off. Second one is it's difficult to support massive connectivity. So that's why people came up with the concept of NOMA, which is non-orthogonal multiple access. The main idea is somehow share the spectrum among different users. Okay. Now I have a very simple question. Was NOMA not known at all? As in, is NOMA something which came after 4G came, or after this wireless communication came, or anything like that? Was NOMA not known before? So, okay, does anyone know when OFDM came for the first time? When was OFDM discovered? I think you might be surprised, but OFDM was discovered in 1960s. Okay, somebody said 2010. No, OFDM was there in 1960s. What is this answer for? Smartphone? When NOMA came, whenever the smartphone came, you are telling. So early 2000, 2005, let's say. Okay, so OFDM was discovered in 1960s, and there is something called superposition coding. Okay, so there is a very famous book on wireless communication by David Say and Pramod Vishwanath. You can go there, look for superposition coding. That's exactly power domain NOMA. Okay, so then that book's first version was written in 1990s, early 1990s. So OFDMA was discovered in 1960s. Superposition coding was discovered in early 90s or even late 80s. Okay, just that the nomenclature of NOMA, characterizing it as NOMA and calling it as a special multiple access mechanism, is something new. And OFDMA also came so late into the market because of the advent in VLSI. OFDMA always existed, but your VLSI was not yet advanced to implement that on a chip. So finally, when our chipsets became very powerful, we were able to do OFDMA on it. Okay. So many of these technologies that you see, they were already there since a long time. I'll tell the same about grant free access also soon. Okay, so now, unlike orthogonal access, NOMA is, as we tell by the name itself, the access is non-orthogonal. That means two people can now interfere with each other. That is the main advantage of orthogonal, right? That two users will not interfere with each other. But here, they will interfere with each other. Now, then why are these technologies useful? If you are creating an interference-based system, it is more harmful. But then that is the way in which we do it. That is, we somehow try to manage this interference. How we are going to manage will result in various NOMA technologies. So for example, power domain NOMA. In power domain NOMA, two or more users will be present, but each user will have a different power level. I'll cancel out the signal from one user and detect the other user. I'll come to that in the next slide itself. So that way users are separated in power domain. Okay. And how I intelligently allocate the power finally dictates how well my performance is. Then the second one is a code domain NOMA technology, where you separate the user through different codes, but these codes are not orthogonal. These are close to being orthogonal. They are not perfectly orthogonal codes. Okay, that is called the sparse code multiple access, SCMA. Okay, then there is something called multi-user sharing access, where you allocate different resources to different users or share two resources with three users and so on. And you have pattern division multiple access, where each user is allocated a pattern where part of the pattern is similar to another user, but another part is different. And there is other things called lattice partition multiple access and so on. There are many NOMA technologies. We can have like 1 week full on just NOMA explaining each of these technologies. So what I am going to cover in this session is the power domain NOMA, which is the most famous NOMA technology, and the code domain NOMA. In the code domain NOMA, specifically sparse code multiple access. These are the two things that I'll be covering in this session. Okay. And you think LTE supports only OFDMA, only SCFDMA? Not really, because from LTE Advanced, they are also supporting NOMA under the heading called Multi-User Superposition Transmission, MUST. Multi-user superposition transmission. And this multi-user superposition transmission is what is there in David Say book, which was written in early 90s. And also the upcoming digital TV standard is going to have power domain NOMA. Okay, so before we move to the kind of domain on which NOMA operates, let's define the bandwidth over this NOMA operates first. So based on the bandwidth, you can have single carrier NOMA or multi-carrier NOMA. So don't think here carrier means single subcarrier. It's just a contiguous set of frequencies. Okay, so I can have, for example, one resource block, which is 12 subcarriers or 180 kilohertz as my single carrier. Okay, and we can do either power domain NOMA, or we can do something called a cognitive radio inspired NOMA on these subcarriers. So let's see what we are going to do in power domain NOMA first. So let's take a single block representing your bandwidth. It might contain one subcarrier or multiple subcarriers, but whenever I am allocating that entire band to all the users. Okay, so let's say there are two users. First one is user 1, who is located far from the base station. Second one is user 2, who is located near to the base station. Okay, don't think about NOMA now. Conventionally, original wireless communication, if I want to maximize the throughput in the system, whom will you give more power, whom will you give less power? If I want to maximize the throughput,
User 2, sir.
yeah, user 2, you will give more power because he's near to the base station. He has very good SNR. He'll maximize your throughput for you. But that is the whole thing. In NOMA, we do the entire opposite. We'll give user 2 less power, user 1 more power. So most power domain NOMA, no, we always tell that it is basically a poor man's access mechanism, because whoever is poor, he'll get more power. So I always give example of our class itself for this. In any class that we teach, there will be strong students, there will be weak students. So we give more attention and more access to weak students so that they can also come up to the same level as the strong students. So that way, in power domain NOMA mechanism, you always give more power to the weaker user, that is whose channel condition is poorer. Obviously, right now, if I'm doing only line of sight, someone who is very far will have poorer channel than someone who is very near. So we give user 1 more power, user 2 less power. Now, what will happen now at user 2? User 2 will get both user 1 signal and user 2 signal. So I will first decode user 1 signal also at user 2, subtract it, and then decode its own signal. So that part is called successive interference cancellation, where user 2 first decodes user 1, subtracts it, and then decodes his signal. User 1, it's okay because user 2 only has small power. It will create some interference. We treat that interference as noise and directly decode user 1 signal. So this is how power domain NOMA works. Immediately, what is the problem you see here? User 2 is decoding user 1 signal, right? What is the biggest problem there? Somebody mentioned this in the previous talk. Security, right? Why should some user 2 be able to decode user 1 signal? That is the whole point, because remember, we are dealing with physical layer here. We are not interpreting any data. If I am decoding his signal, I am just decoding his received symbols. I may even go and decode his bits, but I don't know how to interpret those bits in the physical layer. That's how we physical layer people, that's why we are actually what we call as we are data agnostic. We don't care what those bits mean. We just have to get a 0 as a 0 and 1 as a 1. We don't care what 0 means, we don't care what 1 means as such. Okay, so this is completely feasible because at the physical layer we won't be interpreting that data. With all probability, user 1 may have completely different encryption compared to user 2. We don't care about the encryption. We are just worried about the modulated symbols as such. So as long as I can decode the modulated symbols of user 1, I'll subtract it and decode user 2. Okay, so that's why it's not such a security nightmare as such. Okay, so let's generalize now. Okay, so if we have to do some small amount of math to find out how much power you will allocate to each user. Okay, assume that H1 is worse compared to H2, where H1 is the channel gain. Modulus of H1 is the channel gain. Obviously, poorer channel means higher power. So I'll give alpha 1 as the power to user 1, which will be greater than or equal to alpha 2 if H1 is less than or equal to H2. Now, the base station sends a signal which is for both the users. It will send alpha 1 S1. S1 is the signal for first user plus alpha 2 S2. Each will get multiplied with its own channel gain. So user 1 sees H1 times this plus N1. User 2 sees H2 times this plus N2, where N1 and N2 are the noises. User 1 directly decodes the message signal, right? Because he just treats user 2 signal as noise. So this one is very easy. 1 by rho is basically your 1 by SNR. Okay. Everything is divided by SNR, you think. H1 square alpha 1 square by H1 square alpha 2 square. This is the user 2 signal plus noise. Okay, noise is N0, I can call. Divide numerator and denominator by N0 is confusing. Take noise as say sigma. If I divide everything by sigma, this will be H1 square alpha 1 square by sigma, H1 square alpha 2 square by sigma plus 1. That's how it will be. Or in other words, I can absorb the entire noise into just this term 1 over rho here. So this is the H1 square alpha 1 square is the user 1 signal in terms of power, signal power, divided by noise power. Noise power will contain the actual noise power plus the interference from the second user. So that is that first term, interference from the second user. Second term is the noise power itself, which is written as 1 over rho, where it is 1 over signal to noise ratio. It's just written like that. Okay. Now, after interference cancellation at the second user, user 2 will not have this interference term, right? He won't have h2 square alpha 1 square because he will do excessive interference cancellation. So he will just have h2 square alpha 2 squared divided by 1 by rho, only the noise. So he'll get rho times this thing after SIC. See, this is first user's data rate, log of 1 plus SNR. This is second user's data rate, log of 1 plus SNR. In the first user, there is an interference term. Second user doesn't have that interference term because he has done SIC. So now let's take a case where SNR is tending to infinity. This cannot happen in practice, but we do this analysis because it's called something called an asymptotic analysis. As SNR tends to infinity, what happens? Okay. And one more condition is user 1's channel is hopeless. It is in deep fade. That is, SNR times the channel gain is close to 0. So SNR is going very high, but the channel is so bad that this product is going to 0. Okay. If this is the case, I have to see what is user 1's rate first. We told that rho times h1 square goes to 0 and rho tends to infinity. So if I put rho equal to infinity here, 1 by infinity is 0. So I'll just get h1 square alpha 1 square divided by h1 square alpha 2 square. H1 square will cancel. So I'll get 1 plus alpha 1 square by alpha 2 square. And for the second guy, okay, it is 1 plus rho times this value. And I'm telling that this rho is very high, tending to infinity. Then I can ignore this 1 here and I can write it as log of rho times h2 square alpha 2 square. Correct? Now this is of the form log A plus log B. So it will be log AB. When I take the product, I'll get 1 alpha 1 square plus alpha 2 square. Remember that these alphas are the fraction of the power that I'm allocating. So if my total power is 1, that is alpha 1 square plus alpha 2 squared is 1, the fractions will correspond to alpha 1 and alpha 2. So alpha 1 square plus alpha 2 squared is total power, which I can assume to be unity, 1. So alpha 1 square plus alpha 2 square becomes 1. This denominator alpha 2 squared will get cancelled with this alpha 2 squared, and I'll get this as the total sum rate of NOMA. However, if I do the same thing using OMA, half of the time I will have it for user 1, half of the time I will have it for user 2, that is half of the time rho h1 squared, half of the time rho h2 squared. Now rho h1 squared is tending to 0 because it's going to infinity. So this will become log 1. Log 1 is again 0. So I'll end up with only half of log rho h2 squared. So see, sum rate of OMA when one user is bad, you are using only half of the bandwidth efficiently. But in NOMA, you are giving 2 times more sum rate than compared to OMA scheme. So already we have an example where NOMA is better than OMA. Okay. Second example, let's say user 1 is an IoT device which requires very low data rate. User 2 is a broadband device which requires high data rate. If I use OFDMA, I have to still give them separate subcarriers. That will be very poor because this IoT guy will not utilize the spectrum very well. He'll have very low data rate and overall system throughput will reduce. But if I can use NOMA, I can combine this IoT user on top of the broadband user itself. And that's how I can still support 2 users. This IoT user can detect his signal, treating the broadband user signal as noise. Broadband user can do SIC of the IoT user signal and detect his own signal. Okay. So U1 becomes IoT user, U2 becomes broadband user, and I can do NOMA and get a much better throughput. Okay. So that is power domain NOMA, where you separate users in power. So now the biggest question will be, how do you do optimal resource allocation? In NOMA, the resource is the power only. Okay. But in what we would do in OMA, orthogonal frequency division multiple access, or TDMA, FDMA, we would try to find on each subcarrier what is the optimal power required, or we would also try to find what is the width of each subcarrier required, how many subcarriers are required, or should I make it fixed width or variable width? So all these things we used to have, and it will borrow tools from optimization theory and tell you, okay, have these many subcarriers, have this as the power levels and so on. Okay, but whatever you do, you build the most optimal resource allocation and power allocation policy for OMA, you do NOMA and its performance will be greater than or equal to OMA. This is one result which is proved in literature, and proving that takes a lot of effort, so I am not giving the maths behind it. You just remember that in terms of system throughput, NOMA performance is greater than or equal to OMA performance. We saw one small example for that, right? Where NOMA was 2 times more than OMA when one of the users is poor. And also, whenever you use OMA, orthogonal methods, it is very challenging to make more narrow subcarriers if you want to support more users. But in NOMA, you can superpose these users and make them separable later. Of course, there is a limitation on number of users whom I will superimpose. So as of now, to be very honest, the best case is one user being superimposed with another user. So only 2 users are being superimposed even now. Huawei is recently attempting superimposing 2 users. You will see papers where they have superimposed M users and all. Those are all still theoretical. In practice, right now, only 2 users and at best 3 users are being superimposed. Okay. So the same power domain NOMA is adopted in LTE called MUST, as I told before. There are 3 ways in which they do MUST. First thing is simple. User 1 runs his own coding, scrambling, runs his own modulation. User 2 runs his own modulation, coding, everything. Finally, only power allocation is common to is done such that alpha 1 power goes to user 1, alpha 2 goes to user 2. This is what we saw right now. This is the most simplest way to do power domain NOMA, and this is how LTE is also doing it in most of the cases. In the second one, they have something called, they have joint modulation and power allocation. So here, modulation and power allocation will happen jointly. That they do because user one may have QPSK modulation scheme, user 2 might have 16 QAM modulation scheme. If I want to mix them, then if I try to give them powers separately, it might not be optimal. But if I can give them powers jointly, then it may become optimal. So that's why they do joint modulation and power allocation. The last one is basically you also take their code word. I mean, you do the power allocation, modulation, everything in a combined way on each of their streams itself, right at the bit level itself. Okay, that is the last one, which is hardly implemented. Mostly it is this category 1 which is implemented most of the times, or at best category 2 when the modulation schemes are radically different. Then category 2, 3 is not implemented. Okay. So this is power domain NOMA, where 2 users are separated in power domain. Now, how can we relate this to cognitive radio? Okay, I think long ago, around 10 or 11 years ago, people were crazy about these things called cognitive radios. So these are radios which monitor the environment and take decisions based on your radio environment. Okay, and also it is like this. Cognitive radio is like there is one primary operator. He'll be using the resources most of the time, radio resources. If he is not using it, someone else will use it. That person is called a secondary user. Okay. And typically what we will do in any cognitive radio is we give preference to primary user. And we'll say whenever primary user is not active, some secondary user will sense the spectrum and use it. Same thing. We can relate the same thing to power domain NOMA. You can see user 1 as the primary user in the network and user 2 as the secondary user, or whatever. You can swap it also. If you want to see IoT user as the primary user, that is also fine. If you want to see broadband user as the primary user, that is also fine. Okay, you see one user as a primary user and you opportunistically put the second user. Okay, opportunistically interfere him with the user such that primary user's performance is not degraded, but you get some additional benefit. Okay, but remember, cognitive radio, it is still somewhat orthogonal, because when user 1 is not accessing the spectrum only, you will allow user 2 to access. That's why it can give you some guarantee of how much QoS I can provide, but because power domain NOMA is interference based, you cannot give too many guarantees on the QoS. You can say that I can provide minimum something, but you cannot give too many guarantees on the quality of service. But it helps you support a lot of users. Straight away double the number of users, right? Because on every broadband user, you can put one IoT user. Now, like how we did things on one carrier or one frequency block, one chunk of bandwidth, we can repeat the same on multiple bands, which leads to multi-carrier NOMA. So what do we do in multi-carrier NOMA? Whatever we like, even power domain NOMA, if I do it separately on each frequency chunk, it becomes multi-carrier NOMA. Or I can use all these chunks together and call it and do some sort of a code domain NOMA, such as sparse code multiple access. Okay, these have three features, usually multi-carrier NOMA techniques. One is called spreading. Okay, that is your user bits will be spread over multiple subcarriers. Sparsity, that is the number of resources per user, will be small, and there is a sharing restriction. Why? Interference, right? If I share it with more people will interfere. So small number of users per resource. So these two are very different. Sparsity means number of resources per user, that is also small. Sharing restriction means number of users per resource, the opposite of that, that is also small. Okay, so it looks like this. Don't get afraid with the numbers on the right hand side. So it is like this. Look at user 1. He uses subcarrier 1, subcarrier 2. User 2 uses subcarrier 1, subcarrier 3. User 3 uses subcarrier 1, subcarrier 4, and so on. Okay, so if I write whatever they use as a 1 and whatever they don't use as a 0 and make them column vectors, okay, 1 1 0 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 0 1, like that I'll get this. See the beauty of this matrix. If you sum each column, it is 2. And summing each column means the number of subcarriers allocated to each user. It's exactly 2. So you are being fair to everyone. Everyone is getting exactly 2 users, two resources. And look at the rows now. Sum each row, you will get exactly 3. That means a given subcarrier is shared by exactly 3 people. See, very simple, right? So that is what corresponds to this sharing restriction. So I have indicated clearly here, 6 users, 4 subcarriers. See, if you did orthogonal multiple access, you required 6 users, required 6 subcarriers at least. But see, now we are putting 6 users on 4 subcarriers, and exactly there will be 3 interferers per subcarrier or resource. Okay. So see, spreading the message, the entire 6 users message is spread over 4 subcarriers. Sparsity, only 2 users, only 2 resources or subcarriers are allocated per user. Sharing restriction, exactly 3 people share the resource. And how to decode this? There is something called message passing algorithm. It does not involve SIC. There is something called factor graph and message passing algorithm. If people are familiar with LDPC decoding, LDPC is one of the forward error checking codes. So it's very similar to that decoding. Okay, you use the same algorithm to decode an SCMA signal. Don't confuse this with SCFDMA. SCMA is a NOMA technique. Okay. So I'll come to this grant free one slide later. I mean, after the grant free talk, I'll come to this one. Okay, so now we did all this. We did power domain NOMA, we did code domain NOMA. Can we have cooperative NOMA? That is, see, so why channel is to be taken as square? Oh, it is not channel, channel gain. Channel gain is power, right? Channel is a complex number. Channel gain is the power. What is power? Power is the absolute value of a complex number squared. So that's why we are dealing only with power, right? So that's why it is taken as channel gain squared. Sorry, I told it late. I hadn't seen it. Any other question? Still, Tagbaraj is speaking something I'm not able to hear. Is there any question?
Sir, only that question, sir. Channel gain square. No other questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Fine. So now we saw that one big problem with power domain NOMA, I'm just going back few slides, is this part, right? User 2 has to decode user 1 signal, treating it as, and then decode his own signal. Now, when user 2 tries to decode U1 signal, he may make some mistake. Few bits may go wrong here and there. So that will again hurt user 2's performance. So somehow, if we can know user 1 signal very well, then it will help in boosting user 2's performance, right? So there, cooperative NOMA comes into picture. Now what we do is, sorry, here user 1 and user 2 are swapped. I think there user 2 was near, here user 2 is far. Sorry about that. But what we will see is basically, in this case, the far user, let me call it as far user. For the far user, basically, he detects his signal on his own. The near user first has to detect the far user signal, subtract it, and then get his signal. Now, what if I can help, and what if they can act as a relay? The near user acts as a relay to the far user, or the something like that. Then I can get one user's signal very easily, right? So if user one acts as a relay for user 2, the near user acts as a relay for user 2, then they can both do successive interference cancellation and they can both get good performance. Okay, if they act as relays to each other. So this is how it works basically. Consider a NOMA downlink. Two users are there. Base station sends superposition message, that is alpha 1 S1 plus alpha 2 S2 to both the users. But in the next time slot, user 1 acts as a relay to user 2. So it will send S1 to user 2, whoever is trying to do SIC. Okay, it will send its signal to S1 through some other technology. That is not NOMA. That might be device to device or something else. Okay, through some other technology, it's able to send its signal again. Then it can subtract that and do a better decoding. Okay, don't worry about, these are just simulation parameters to show some results here. So see, performance completely depends on user one's location, whoever is acting as a relay, that guy's location. And with cooperation, the outage probability of the user pair, so outage probability of both user 1 and user 2 joint probability, that reduces. Also, if you take the poor user's performance, with cooperation, the outage probability of the poor user also reduces. So that means if one user can cooperate with another user, you will definitely improve the performance of the NOMA system. But again, cooperation is very easy. Yeah, I mean, very difficult, easier said than done, because now security issues will come into picture. Because you might want to give data at some, if you give it the data as just modulated symbols, then it may be secure. But if you want to give the actual bit and give the encryption so that this can also regenerate the same message as user one, then there will be a security issue. Okay, so this is the main takeaway, that if users collaborate or cooperate, then the performance will improve. Okay, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Basically, if you are familiar with game theory, there is something called Nash equilibrium, and the guy who did it, like John Nash, who developed all this, there is a very good movie made on him called A Beautiful Mind. So there also he devises this cooperation in one of the parties. Okay, I won't elaborate more. So he will He will tell you basically like what will be your success rate with a girl if you are going to a party, if friends cooperate and if friends don't cooperate. So okay, so like that, if users cooperate, you can have better performance. If users don't cooperate, then the performance will be slightly bad. Okay, now let's go to NOMA and MIMO. So the biggest question was, see, when we did all this, we never talked about antennas as such. Can we do NOMA when there are multiple antennas? Of course, yes, you can do it. In fact, it, though you can do it, it will become slightly challenging, because remember how we did power domain NOMA? We have to first kind of arrange all the channels in the increasing order. Then whoever has the bad channel, you give him more power, like that. Then your powers will be in decreasing order. If your channels are in increasing order, powers will be in decreasing order. That means you need ordering of users. That is easier to do when it is one antenna. But the moment you have MIMO, all the scalars will become vectors or matrices, and it will become very difficult to order the users. But it is possible, and it is beyond the scope of this discussion as how we order it. Like for scalars, how we ordered, we just took the squares of the ABS values that of the channel. That is nothing but the channel gains. We took scalars values of the channel gains and arranged them. For matrices, you can take the norm, Frobenius norm, or the norm. For vectors also, you can take norm, use it as a way to arrange the channels and so on. Okay. So like this, you can order different users. And typically they compare the performance of MIMO NOMA with something called dirty paper coding, which is used as the benchmark to compare the performance of MIMO systems. Okay. But analyzing the gap between dirty paper coding and MIMO NOMA, these are all very challenging tasks. So this dirty paper coding is a very ideal sort of mechanism to provide multiple access in MIMO systems. Again, I'll just leave these keywords here. Those who are more interested can go and study about these things later. All you just need to know is dirty paper coding is optimal for MIMO systems. So whatever new technology you develop along with MIMO, usually the performance is compared against that dirty paper coding. Okay. So visually, if you want to simply have a picture of how MIMO LOMA may look like, typically what will multiple antenna do? It can create more beams. So if there is MIMO OMA, that is only orthogonal, then you can think of it as only one user per beam. But with NOMA, you can put more users per beam. Okay, this is the way you can visualize MIMO NOMA. Okay, MIMO multiple antennas provide newer dimensions always. If you are using orthogonal access, only one device you can put per dimension. But if you use NOMA, you can put multiple users for each dimension. Okay. And within each beam, you can use power domain NOMA or core domain NOMA. There is no rule that you have to separate users in power or you have to separate users in code like that. You can use whatever NOMA you are comfortable with. Okay, next. This is slightly new. Now with all the 5G coming, etc., people are asking, can I do NOMA in millimeter wave bands? Why not? But it is somewhat contradicting, right? We went to millimeter wave because spectrum in normal microwave bands is small. That's why we went to millimeter wave bands where we have enough spectrum already. And we told we should use NOMA because only when spectrum is small, NOMA can help in sharing the spectrum. But then we will get the question, do we still need NOMA? Actually, we still need, because how much ever spectrum you give, at some point you will run out of it, especially with all this IoT and other small devices coming and accessing the network. There will be billions of devices, and even if you have more spectrum, it will not be sufficient. Okay, so it's better to still reuse the spectrum in an efficient way. That's why we need NOMA even in millimeter wave bands. Okay, so now how do we build a millimeter wave NOMA system model? This looks very difficult, but actually it's very easy. I always have this section because people think, again, research system modeling is very difficult. It's actually easy if you go step by step, and logically if you solve in each step. So let us consider a base station with M antennas. See, Already I'm doing multi-antenna scenario, but users all have single antenna. Users all have single antenna. So what kind of scenario it is? MISO, multi-input, single output. Okay, M or SIMO, however you want to think. If base station is transmitting out, then it is multi-input. If base station is receiving, it's multi-output, depending on the direction you see. Okay, so in this it's the downlink. So you are transmitting. So multi-inputs are there. Output you get only one output because you have only one antenna. You will just get the sound signal at that antenna. So one base station with M antennas, multiple single antenna users. Base station covers a region denoted by some radius RD. It covers a disk of radius RD. It's located at the origin. Okay. Now don't worry about all this homogeneous Poisson point process with density lambda and all. Users are randomly deployed in that disk. Okay. Like this, it looks like. So see, when we deploy users, we have to define some random process that we have defined as a homogeneous Poisson process. That's all. That is nothing but if you take a 2D plane and uniformly distribute in both x and y direction, it will become that. So it's not something huge. So this is your base station, the triangle, and circles are all the users. Okay. Now there are some angles here, delta, this delta, theta, and all are there. We'll come to that soon. So this is how it looks like. Now, for a millimeter wave NOMA system, the channel gain HK is computed using this ugly looking equation here. But again, if you just spend 2 minutes on this equation, there is nothing big here. Okay. So now, first path is called the line of sight path. We all know what is line of sight, right? Direct path. It's not getting reflected from anywhere. Of course, because I have M antennas, I get a root M gain. Because in terms of power, I get an M factor gain. In terms of amplitude, it will be a root M gain. And AK0 is the channel gain of the direct path. Okay. This AK comma 0. This bold face A is the beamforming vector of that particular direction. So we are assuming that theta K0 is the LOS direction. Okay. So you can easily understand that from this figure. So you can make it as, for example, for these users in that shaded region here, for all the users in that shaded region here, theta 1 is the line of sight region. Okay. Theta 1, 0 is the line of sight path. Beamforming vector corresponding to other multipaths will be theta KL, where L goes from 1 to L because there are L multipaths. Okay. And this is a standard formula for millimeter wave. So there is some based on the distance. You remember for free space model, as we move a distance d, power decreases by d squared. So this alpha LOS is that path loss exponent. Typically we take it as 3 in millimeter wave bands, 3 or 3.5, because the decrease is sharper in millimeter wave bands compared to free space models. And similar equation for multipaths, different non-line of sight paths. If I have L such paths, I have to sum over all those L. Very easy, right? Actually, it looks very ugly. This bold face here is the beamforming vector, okay, of the line of sight path here, of the non-line of sight path in here. So I have the channel defined by the line of sight gain plus non-line of sight gain. I did all this. Then I make this amazing assumption. Millimeter wave, you hardly get line of sight, forget non-line of sight. Very less non-line of sight components will be there. So I'll write such a big equation and then say this component goes to 0. This is how we write papers. Then it will get accepted easily. You introduce something complex, then say this tends to 0. Okay. So you are left with only line of sight path. Okay. See, very simple. Root M comes from M antennas. This is the gain of the line of sight path. This is the beamforming vector. This is the path loss you experience. Finished. If I square this, I'll get the channel gain. Okay. Now, if two users are in the same direction, then their channels will be highly correlated. Obviously, right? Look at these two users. They are in the same direction of the beam. So their channels will also be similar. Their powers might be slightly different. That is, the received signal power might be slightly different, but the channel gains will be almost similar. SNR might be different. Okay, channels are highly correlated. So we can take that into account. Why I stopped here is the moment you know the channel gains, you can order these channel gains now. Take mod HK squared, order all these channel gains. Whichever has low channel gain, give it more power. Whichever has big channel gain, give it less power. And you can implement a power domain millimeter wave NOMA system. See, very straightforward if you know the basics, nothing too big. Now there are also systems which do both OMA and NOMA together. Okay, that is called hybrid NOMA systems. So you can think of it like this. You have your big bandwidth. Let's put some numbers, it will become easy. Let's say you have 1000 megahertz bandwidth. You create 5 chunks of 200 kilohertz in it. Okay, within each 200 kilohertz you can use NOMA, but you can not use NOMA over the entire 1000 kilohertz. Okay, 1000 kilohertz bandwidth you have, that is 1 megahertz bandwidth. Within each 200 kilohertz you can do NOMA, but you can't do NOMA over the entire 1 megahertz. So that is an example for your hybrid NOMA system, where part of your you do NOMA on small parts of your bandwidth. Okay, that's why so they call each of these small part as a group. Intergroup within intergroup is OMA, so that I don't interfere with one group of users with another. But intra-group, within each group, people can interfere. Okay, good. Then the biggest question will come as, who will get grouped with whom? Those are all some open problems in literature. You can try and figure out based on your application who will get grouped with whom. Okay, and typically what we do is we always group a good channel guy with a bad channel guy, exactly like power domain NOMA, especially if you are doing power domain NOMA, right? Because you can do SIC. So the worst case will occur if you group two people who are having the same channel gain. So now let's quickly see what happens to the performance of NOMA if both channels are same. Using the same equations as before, it will end up with this result here. And if both channels are same, OMA also ends up with the same result. So still see, in the worst case, NOMA has the same performance as OMA in the worst case. So in other cases, it will definitely have better performance. That's why I made a statement that time. Okay, that NOMA is always greater than or equal to OMA in terms of throughput performance. Okay, same equations I have used from before. You can simplify it very easily. Same log of A plus B multiply. Okay. How will you do resource allocation? I won't go in deep into this. These are very, very advanced problems. So basically, how do you divide the groups? How do you, within each group, how will you pair the users? All this turn out to be what we call as some mixed integer non-convex optimization problem. So it's very difficult to find optimal solutions for this. So many a time we end up finding some suboptimal solution, but the solution complexity will be low and it can be somewhat locally optimum. For a given time instant, it is optimum, it's not a global optimum. So like that, we will end up doing some solutions. And also the biggest challenge in NOMA is multi-user detection. Okay, again, it will become useful in grant-free scenarios, which I'll explain soon. And many multi-user detection algorithms are there, such as orthogonal matching pursuit, iterative support detection, structured iterative support detection, and so on. Okay, again, these are beyond the scope of this session because I'm only introducing NOMA here, how it is different from OMA, how you can share the spectrum with multiple users. I taught you power domain NOMA and code domain NOMA, SCMA. So now you have learned at least one NOMA technique, two NOMA techniques, along with your orthogonal techniques. What I have only taught you about transmission. I didn't teach you how to detect the users. Even in SCMA, I just made a comment that detecting them is same as detecting LDPC codes. Power domain NOMA, I taught you detection because I told you can do SIC and do the detection. But multiple algorithms are there based on compressive sensing. These are all based on compressive sensing, which can help you in detecting multiple users. they are very intricate. I mean, in just 1 hour, I can not cover all these things. So I've just mentioned some of them here. You can go through these, or you can have attend some dedicated workshops on NOMA itself to know more about how the multi-user detection works. Okay. With that, I am ending the NOMA part of this talk. Next, I'll be starting the grant-free access part. Okay. That is slightly different from NOMA. So if you have any questions on NOMA or the LTE session which was completed, please let me know now. We can take 5 minutes of questions on this, and then we can continue with grant-free access. Which book do you suggest for dirty paper coding? I won't suggest any book. You have to go through the original papers of dirty paper coding. Books oversimplify the things. So please go through the actual dirty paper coding paper. All these share tech note and other things related to dirty paper coding unnecessarily oversimplify the things. So of course it is math intensive. You have to go through something which is very much math intensive, but it's not impossible to understand. Okay. Can we use NOMA in 5G? It's already present in 5G. Again, power domain NOMA is present in 5G. I already showed how you can use for millimeter wave. Part of 5G is also millimeter wave, right? So definitely you can use NOMA in 5G. So if you go to the Wikipedia of dirty paper coding, right? That is a nice, very small. If you see there, the amount of introduction is extremely small. Okay, that is because it only tells that it achieves the channel capacity. Dirty paper coding achieves channel capacity. That's what they mentioned. How exactly that helps? There are two. One is the main COSTA pre-coding paper that was in the 80s. The other good paper is there is a professor called Kaire, G. Kaire. So his paper on DPC came in early 2000. That paper is very good. So that if you understand, you will be easily able to get what is dirty paper coding. There are also other pre-coding like THP, Tomlinson, Harashima and all that, but dirty paper coding is easier.
Sir, what is the status of cognitive radio implementation in 5G, sir? Hello, sir.
Calling primary user, secondary user, I call it as user 1 of a NOMA system and user 2 of a NOMA system. So it gets absorbed within NOMA only. That's why you won't find any specific literature for cognitive radio in 5G.
Thank you, sir.
So one more thing is also cognitive radios get absorbed in the system models. We do talk about overlay and underlay models. So you can search for these terms, overlay and underlay models of networks, and then you will understand how you can relate that to cognitive radio. So they all get absorbed in the system model and in the access mechanism. That's why they don't deal with it separately.
Sir, even it is, we're talking about cognitive optical networks also.
Optical is different. I am talking here only about wireless communication technologies.
Okay.
Optical is a different animal altogether, because especially fiber optic communication is entirely different to whatever we are discussing right now.
Fine, sir.
Unfortunately, I don't have much exposure to that and experience also.
Fine, sir. Thank you, sir. Yeah, dear participants, if you have any questions, please ask.
Okay. Mm. Any other specific NOMA specific question? Like somebody is trying some sort of NOMA, facing difficulty, something like that. Okay. Sir, in 4G, are they using OMA? Yes. Mostly it is OMA only, right? OFDMA is an OMA technology. That's what I mentioned initially. So 4G LTE, downlink uses OFDMA, uplink uses SCFDMA. Both are orthogonal multiple access. There is support for NOMA in the downlink. Very few operators or modern manufacturers enable that. So that's what I mentioned as it supports NOMA also in terms of multi-user superposition transmission, but not many people are using it as of now. So by default, it is OMA in 4G. That is OFDMA in downlink and SCFDMA in the uplink. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, I will just stop sharing this and I will start with the grant free. Okay, I hope you are able to see these slides.
Yes, sir, we are able to see, sir.
Okay, so grant free access is something, it's a very new technology which I should say it's a old wine in a new bottle. It's an old technology being tried in a new way for 5G. And I started working on this during the end of my PhD around 2017. And I have continued working on this since that time. Most of these things, the things that I am presenting today is along with is related to my first work on grant free here at IIT Dharwad with my PhD student Harini. So that's why I've acknowledged her here. Don't think that I have acknowledged her because she made some slides for me. I make my own slides always. We jointly discuss the content of the slides. And of course, some results and all, we wrote it as a paper. That's why she has it as the results. I took the figures from that paper itself, where she is the first author and I am the second. So that's why we have to acknowledge her contribution to the entire work. Okay, now how do users access the network in LTE? I explained the procedure, right? That you have to first do synchronization with the primary and secondary synchronization signals. Then you transmit a request telling I want access, and base station gives you permission. There I told off very easily like that in just 2 steps. Users transmit, hey, I want access. Base station says, okay, you are permitted. Now, if we zoom into that part, actually this is what is happening. When user has already synchronized in the downlink, if it wants access in the uplink, it sends something called the random access preamble. If the base station detects that preamble, it sends a random access response. Then user will send a connection request. Then if it detects that connection request, it sends a connection setup. That is, your connection has been set up. Then user says, this is the amount of data I want to send. Then base station gives a grant telling that, okay, send your data here. Then finally it will attach to the network and start sending data. So see, so many messages are exchanged before the user can actually attempt sending data. So now this is called grant-based access because completely the base station is controlling the way you access the network. And this is what is happening in 4G and even in 5G by default. Okay. Now, okay, maybe I don't have a slide on it. Okay. What is the biggest problem with this? Of course, latency. So many message exchanges. But where is it helpful? If I have large amount of data to send and if I use the network for a long amount of time, I can do this once and forget, right? Once I can do this, remain connected for next 15 minutes, then do this again for next after 15 minutes. So that way, when I have large amount of data to send, this is still feasible. But again, think about our IoT devices. They have small amount of data to send. Every time they want to send like say a few bits, not even. So typically your meter readings are only 64 bits. So to send 64 bits, if you are wasting so much time during doing all this grant-based access, then you will be very inefficient in terms of power consumption or energy consumption, right? So this is not good for IoT devices, especially when you are sending small amount of data. Quickly, let us see how this grant or what people are doing in this first step here. So in order to understand or eliminate some of the steps from here, you should understand some of the key steps, right? The key step here is the first step, which is the random access preamble. So what does it mean? What does it mean when I say user sends a random access preamble? So that is this. In LTE, there is something called a Zadoff-Chu sequence. Every user randomly picks one of the 64 available sequences and sends it. So obviously users may collide because two people can pick the same sequence. Then the base station will not be able to resolve them. But if there are two people or three people, each picked a different sequence, base station is able to detect all these three and send a response to all the three. Okay. So that is in LTE. Now in NB-IoT, it is not just a sequence anymore. They won't send any Zadoff-Chu sequence or anything. In NB-IoT, for the random access preamble, each user sends some pattern like this. Okay, blue is the pattern of a particular user. Now, this pattern depends on which subcarrier you began with. Okay, and user has a choice of 12 subcarriers. So a given user can begin at any one of the subcarriers. Given the starting subcarrier, standard tells you what is the pattern, this jumping pattern you have to follow. Okay, it will follow that pattern and send. It will only send one in each of these subcarrier. Actual value 1 is sent, of course, scaled by the power level, is sent on each of these subcarriers. Now, what is its limitation? If I have more than 12 users, obviously at least 2 users will collide because 12 users, best case, each one goes on a different subcarrier. Okay. If I have a 13th user, he will definitely collide with one of these 12. Correct? So that is how it is also collision limited. So what we learned is the first step is anyway limited by collision. Random access preamble transmission is anyway limited by collision. So what we thought, then why if the first step itself is limited by collision, why should I take so much permission from you to send the data? Anyway, my performance is dictated by the first step, where collision may happen or may not happen. So what if I do like whenever I am sending the random access preamble, I will also send the data along with it. Why can't I do that without you giving me any grant? And that now is called grant free access. And what it is similar to, it is very similar to Aloha. We all know Aloha from our computer networks course, right? Tenenbaum or whatever you referred. Unfortunately, I don't know any VTU books. So in Tenenbaum computer networks book, there is a very nice section on Aloha. I still remember the graphs, like normal Aloha success rate is 18%, slotted Aloha 36%, all these things. They are very nice graphs there. Okay. So grant free access is very similar to that. Whenever you have data, send it. That's all. Okay, that's why I said it is a old wine in a new bottle. So now, how do we do such an Aloha such that it is compatible with LTE or 5G? That forms the crux of this talk. Okay. Now, of course, as usual, it is easier said than done. But why do we require such a scheme? I already told you, because for IoT devices, it is bad to waste time trying to get a grant and trying to secure permission to send your data, because the amount of data you send will be very small. Then the biggest question is, can a user just send the data? Of course not, right? I mean, if you simply send data, how will the base station know it belongs to you? So what we will do is, we'll do some signature with the data. That is, we will send the preamble and the data both. Next one, what happens if two or more users transmit at the same time? Same as whatever was happening before. If they choose different sequences, they will not collide. If they choose the same sequence, they collide. So I'm not changing the underlying system in any way. Okay. And how will the base station recognize different users? Same as how it was recognizing before. Because anyway, it would recognize the random access preambles. Now it will recognize the preamble as well as data. That's it. Okay. Now, before we move into how we exactly do it, let's look at what all advantages it can give. The first and foremost advantage it can give is basically in terms of latency. Okay, see this, in the original LTE, it had to do all these things, right? Basically waiting time for you to start something, that is, we'll say one transmission time interval. TTI is usually 1 millisecond in LTE. Okay, UE sends service request on this control channel, that is 1 TTI. E node B generates the grant, that is 3 TTIs. Transmission of the grant is 1 TTI. UE processing delay is 3 TTIs. It has to process all these things, right? Base station sends the grant, UE has to process it and then send its data. That processing delay is 3 seconds, 3 TTIs. Same for uplink transmission itself, takes 1 TTI, let's say. Then base station decodes that and sends an ACK or NAC, that is 3 TTIs. So it takes so many things. But in grant free, there is no wait time. Whenever you have data, you send. Then whatever you send, that transmission time is 1 TTI and decoding time at the D node B remains to be 3 TTIs. So what you are accomplishing in 13 TTIs, you can now accomplish it with just 4 TTIs. Okay, TTI is 1 millisecond in LTE, one symbol in 5G. The unit here is wrong, should be microseconds. One symbol is 72 microseconds. Okay, so see, almost you divided it by 3, right? By a factor of 3. The amount of latency reduced by a factor of 3. And latency is directly linked to energy, remember. Also, it will avoid lot of signaling overhead. See, for example, look at this case. Don't look at the preamble duration and all, it may confuse you. Just look at this RAR and RRC, that is radio access request and radio resource connected, radio resource configuration connection setup. To set up all this, you need to send new messages which are like almost 51 bytes. Okay, and take a typical IoT node, it sends like 40 bytes of data. The amount of control signaling you need is more than the data itself. See that these are real numbers, by the way, real practical numbers which are now running in the standards. Like right now, broadband users are sending like 4,000 bytes of data or even more. Okay, so this 51 bytes becomes negligible that time. But for an IoT user, he's sending only 40 bytes of data. For him, overhead itself is higher than the data size. This is very bad, right? I mean, it's like telling, for example, it's like telling my test is only for 5 minutes, but you have to come all the way from, say, Jammu and Kashmir to IIT Dharwad to attend this test and go. So that is bad. If my test is like, if there is one test of 1 hour, based on that I'll shortlist you again, then you will have a presentation, then you will have one more thing. Like that you have, if you had lot of things and if you were supposed to stay in Dharwad, say for 3 or 4 days, then I can tell it is worth coming from Jammu and Kashmir. But what is this like? If I have only 40 bytes to send, but my overhead itself is 51 bytes. That is very bad. So that can be avoided with grant free access. Okay. So all this translates to energy consumption. So of course, energy consumption will be more if I keep on spending more time in the permission part itself, that four-step ratch. We call this as the four-step ratch. The first diagram. Up to here is the ratch, up to message 4. After that, you get the grant and you transmit. So this four-step ratch procedure, no, if you keep on spending time there, it is very bad. It will unnecessarily consume lot of energy. And based on different path laws and all, your ratch may consume as much as 50% of your energy. Data is consuming only 30% of your energy, which is again a very bad scenario to have. Okay. So how may grant free work? Actually, I can say how will grant free work here, because when I wrote this, this was not at standardized. Now it is standardized. This was one more contribution from us which went to the standards. So what we told here was, don't do grant free always. Grant free is not applicable to all sorts of things. As I told before, do grant free only when you have small data. See, by default, you will be in connected state. Through your regular grant based four-step ratch procedure, you have entered connected state. Okay. And you are doing lot of large data and all, then you keep remaining in connected state. But let's say if your large data failed, or like if there is no more data for you, then you go to something called grant free state. Okay. You be in grant free state, which is very much like this idle state, but you will remain in idle state only when you have no data. But in grant free state, you will be like in idle state, but whenever you have small data, you will have an option to transmit here using some grant free mechanism. In idle state, you don't have that option to transmit. You have to come back to connected state to transmit. Okay. So you go to something called an in-between state called a grant free state. Whenever you have small data, transmit using grant free. However, if it is large data, then you go back to connected and then transmit. So what we told was, if your data is small, transmit using grant free state. Any questions up to this point? Everyone understood what is grant free? Instead of waiting for base station to give you permission to send data, you will send data along with your first preamble itself. However, you can't do this for all kinds of data. You will do this only when the size of the data is small. That is the entire summary up to this point. Okay, so now what is exactly transmitted in grant free access? Now there are two modes. One is called the synchronous mode, where your timing, you are kind of reliable, you know the timing, base station also knows you. So at that time, you can just send a long CP along with data and pilots. Okay, because base station already knows you. But grant free is mostly used in that second mode called asynchronous mode, where the base station doesn't know you yet. Okay, so you will have to send your signature, which is called a preamble, plus data and pilots. And what are the main challenges? Of course, minimizing collisions and detecting multiple users. Okay, so now the next 4 slides are intense, but you need not worry too much. It's only summarizing the existing work in grant free. Okay, so what people have done is, they have found out the success probability of grant free access in massive MIMO scenarios, or they have changed the ratch itself to a two-step ratch. In fact, two-step ratch is now standardized in 5G. What is two-step ratch? There are two versions. Let me look at the simplest version, which is this. First step itself, you send data and preamble, you get it acknowledged from the base station. This is what we were talking about, right? There is another two-step ratch, which is like this, which is slightly more complicated. I won't go into the details of that. Not able to pull it down. Just give me a second. Editing the figures. Okay. So this is that second two-step ratch kind of thing, where you send preamble, that gets detected, then you send acknowledgement, and then it gets detected, and then you send data. So though it looks like multiple steps, you can combine some of these steps. That's why it's called two-step ratch. Basically, it's telling first you send preamble, let it get acknowledged, then you send data. Still, it is two-step. Okay. In the other two-step one, which is the preferred one, which I was also discussing, there you send preamble plus data together and both get acknowledged or both get missed. Okay. There are two ways to do it. And 5G also supports something called early data transmission that is similar to this two-step B. Okay. And you need not worry about it. What people have shown is basically, see this star is that kind of grant free access which we were proposing. That is extremely good. See the average energy consumption of that, sorry, not star, of the square. Square is the two-step A, which we were proposing. That is the least. And the second type of two-step is the next lowest in terms of energy consumption. But if you go for anything like the existing four-step patch and all, those are these diamonds, okay, which are very bad in terms of energy consumption. Okay, so that is the two-step patch. And then people are trying to merge both grant-based and grant-free together, like how they were merging OMA and NOMA together. Hybrid schemes they are designing to optimize the small data rate performance. But from all this, what you see is this, the very easy procedure which I told you, that is send preamble plus data together, that incurs the lowest energy consumption. Okay. So the second one is on collision avoidance and resolution. See, this graph here is very similar to your Aloha. In fact, if I say slotted Aloha, see analytical slotted Aloha, 36% is its success rate, right? See, we get that itself. So people are trying to do some modified sort of Aloha, and they have now improved the performance to almost say for the same traffic at one traffic, aggregate traffic is one, let's say it's some unit. One means it is like one device per some second and so on, per some millisecond and so on. For that, they have made sure that you can as well go up to, you can have much more improved throughput, 80% more improved throughput compared to 36% in original sorted Aloha. Okay, so there are many works related to this. I need not go through each of the works here. So basically they characterize bursty arrivals, and they also do, see, like how we did NOMA, people also did non-orthogonal pilot designs. So remember, in grant free we are sending preamble, data and pilots. Typically pilots are orthogonal, but people told why to do all that, we can do non-orthogonal pilots. And they also came up with some collision avoidance schemes. And this is one of our works, this 8, where we built a different receiver itself for grant free. But there is a constraint to it. It works only for real valued modulation, that is BPSK, PAM and so on. It does not work for QPSK. If it is real valued modulation, it works. Okay. Then the other one is, how do you design preambles? Okay. So what they found was, see this, for grant based access, you need a lower length preamble. I told you, remember, there is nothing like free lunch. Okay, grant free access, you make something easy, but it will be at the expense of something else, right? So that expense is preamble length. You cannot afford to have the same length preamble as grant based access. The length of your preamble increases for grant free. Okay, but still you gain because you send preamble and data together, so average latency will still reduce. So again, people have analyzed a lot of preamble structures, and they have come up with the optimal preamble length, which is what I have showed you now. They have considered non-orthogonal sequences for preambles. Typically in LTE, for example, preambles are orthogonal sequences. They use ZC sequences and their shifts. They are all orthogonal, but remaining are so now for grant free they are trying non-orthogonal preambles also. Okay, and same thing, how they can reuse, how they can do some say spatial regrouping, use multiple antennas and so on. So in this graph, in fact, this M is the number of antennas. Okay, they have tried with 100 antennas, 200 antennas, 500 antennas. It looks impractical, but honestly in a millimeter wave scenario, realizing 100 antennas is pretty easy. The die size is smaller than your hand size with 100 antennas. Okay, so this was evaluated in massive MIMO millimeter wave scenarios, we can do similar evaluations for our normal LTE bands also. Again, the learning is basically for grant free, you need slightly advanced receivers, and also you need higher preamble lengths compared to grant based, and collision resolution is more important in grant free than in grant based. These are the three main learnings. Okay, so let's move to the setting. So now from here, what we did starts. I keep doing this because I always believe that if I can do research, anyone can do research. So basically, at the end of the day, all my roots will be in probability and in communications, basic communications. So nothing here is too advanced from now onwards, but it has strong roots in probability. If you are not comfortable with probability, you will not be able to follow too much. Okay. So, but anyway, I'll try to simplify it for you further. So let us consider an asynchronous grant free setting where you have preamble followed by data. In that also, let's worry only about preamble transmission as of now. Okay. And we consider these three events. The first event is all users are successful. You can drop that in a category. So we have two categories. One is fixed users, two is random users following a Poisson distribution. So that we can drop as of now. Say all users are successful. Event two is all but two users are successful. So that is, if there are 10 users in the system, event one is all 10 are successful. Event two is exactly 8 users are successful. All but two. Remember, exactly 8 users are successful. Event three is at least all but two users are successful. That is, event three is greater than or equal to 8 users are successful. Okay. Event 2 is exactly 8. Event 3 is greater than or equal to 8 if the total number of users is 10. Now we will try to find these probabilities. Good. Now let's see. How many of you think this first equation itself is a bouncer? This is the probability that all users are successful. How many of you think this itself is difficult to understand? There is no answer. That means everyone thinks that it is difficult to understand. Okay. So what I will do now is maybe I can reshare the screen with some of the, I can just write down some notes now because I'll show you how simple it is. Then you will feel bad that you felt that it is difficult. I'll just stop sharing for a minute. I'll share my entire screen. Or maybe I'll share this note. Okay. Okay. So basically, I gave this big expression, right? N factorial by n minus m factorial into 1 by n to the power m. So this is the probability that all m users are successful. How did I arrive at this? This is super simple. This is high school stuff, believe me. M users, I can write them like m blocks here, 1, 2, up to m. Now n is the number of preambles I have. Okay. When will all of them be successful? When all of them pick a different preamble. Okay. So first guy has n choices. He can pick any n. He is fine. He's the first guy to pick. Second guy, he cannot pick whatever first guy picked. So he has only n minus 1 choices. Similarly, third guy has only n minus 2 choices. Like that, the last guy has n minus m plus 1 choices. See, second guy n minus 1, third guy n minus 2, and so on, right? So n minus m plus 1 for the third guy. So total number of ways in which all of them pick different preambles are n into n minus 1 into n minus 2 up to n minus m plus 1, product of all these. If I didn't put any restriction, the total number of ways would be each one had n choices. If I didn't put any restriction on uniqueness of their preambles, each one had n choices. So that would be n to the power m. So this is the probability with which all users will be successful. Number of ways in which all users are successful divided by total number of ways, which is n to the power m. Now this thing I can in a fancy way write it like this, right? N factorial by n minus m factorial, or npm if you want to write it in terms of permutations and combinations. See, high school stuff, looks fancy, very easy. This is the probability with which all m users are successful. Okay, now I'll stop this and share my other one, the talk slides. So I'll share the talk slides. Basically, can you just give me a second? Just have a visitor. I think session ends at 1:30. Sorry. So I'll share. Able to see my Cisco meetings. Okay, here. Sorry for the delay. I'm just not able to get my meetings page. I don't know why. Okay, maybe.
Sir, I think you are not unmuted, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry. So was I audible when I wrote the notes?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir, during that time.
Okay, thanks. So we have this probability. It is very difficult to play with factorials. So we found a lower bound for that probability. That is a difficult task. Somehow we found it, let's say. We also found an upper bound and we proved that they are very tight and so on. Okay. What is a lower bound? That means this value can be approximated by this value. Equation 1 can be approximated by equation 2, and it is slightly lower than this, but it is pretty tight. Then this looks very easy for analysis compared to this because I don't have factorials anymore. So we kept on using this to find out. So now we ask the question, if I have to guarantee some probability of success, let's say 0.9, if I set this PLB to 0.9, then how many preambles do I need if there are m users in the system? That is very easy, right? I just have to raise it to the power 2 by m and simplify. It's a very simple equation which I have to simplify, and I'll get the number of preambles. This bracket indicates seal. Number cannot be a fraction, right? Number of preambles cannot be a fraction. So I seal it. I get this equation for the number of preambles. Great. Now, similarly, I can calculate what is the probability of success of an individual user also. This is the probability that all users are successful. I can also calculate the probability of success of an individual user. How do I do that? Again, very simple. Go back to this thing, draw these boxes without loss of generality. Let's say I am that user. Out of m users, I am one user, and remaining m minus 1 users are here. Okay, 1, 2, up to m minus 1. So I picked a preamble. Let's say I picked preamble number 20 or something. I picked a preamble. When will I be successful? When none of these pick 20. I don't care whether they collide among themselves. I am very selfish. When will I be successful? I don't care what they pick. All they have to do is not pick 20 out of n preambles available, not pick this particular one preamble. So each one has how many choices? Each one has n minus 1 choices because they can pick anything other than 20. So totally it will be n minus 1 to the power m minus 1. That is the total number of ways in which they can pick 20 preambles divided by n to the power m minus 1, right? If I don't put that restriction, each one had n choices. So total number of ways in which they pick a different preamble than mine divided by the total number of ways itself. That if we simplify will become this nice looking expression 1 minus 1 by n. I can write it as, it is nothing but n minus 1 by n, right? See, again high school stuff. Now another way to analyze if all users are successful would be treat each user as independent. So each user's success is P. Okay, if I write each user's success is P, each user success is P, then what is M user success? If all are independent, it should ideally be P to the power M. They are all independent, I just multiply the probabilities, right? But what we found was a very logical thing. If one user is failing, obviously another user is failing, because he fails only if someone else picked the same preamble as him. So no need to raise it to m, we can raise it to m by 2 now. I can treat them as pair of users and raise it to m by 2, p to the power m by 2, and then we substituted for p and got this also as another expression for probability of success of all users. Remember, this expression and this expression in 2, they both represent the same thing. So we ended up proving that this and that are also close to each other. So you can either use this or use that equation 2 to find the probability of success of all users. Now this was all the case when number of users were fixed. We can repeat the same exercise when number of users follow a Poisson distribution also. Then you will get, because they are random now, you will not get one individual probability of success. You will get average or the expected value of the probability of success, which is this. Okay. How do you get this? Again, very easy. I use the fixed user expression that n factorial by n minus m factorial times 1 over n to the power m. I use this, I take the Poisson case. Okay. So this now this m is not fixed, it is some k where k follows a Poisson distribution. Sorry. So n factorial by n minus k factorial into 1 by n to the power k I do, and I multiply it with the Poisson distribution, which is exponential minus lambda, lambda to the power k by k factorial, and I have to take the average, which is the expected value, which is nothing but sum of all this from k equal to 0 to infinity. So if I solve this summation, many things will cancel out. This n factorial by into k factorial, I can write it as n choose k by n to the power k, all these things, lambda by n to the power k. I can simplify all these, like actually can do it off, it's not too difficult. 0 to infinity, n factorial by n minus k factorial into k factorial, that is nothing but n choose k. This is not dependent on k, so it goes outside. Then I can write it as lambda by n whole to the power k. Now what is this? This is nothing but the Taylor series expansion of exponential lambda by n sort of thing. So we can use all that. This is the Taylor series expansion of 1 plus lambda by n. Okay. So like that we can simplify this. And n is represented as y here, because for Poisson case we took number of preambles as y. So 1 plus lambda by n whole to the power n. Okay. That is what, this is the Taylor series expansion of 1 plus lambda by n whole to the power n. Because I'll get this only. If you simplify this, expand this, you will get this only. Okay. So that is how we ended up with this. From this again you can calculate the number of preambles required. Simplify for y. Okay. Very simple. You have to take log and simplify. That's all. Same approach like we did, we can do here for individual number and raise it to the power lambda by 2. Individual user success, raise it to the power lambda by 2. You will get the same as fixed case. So let's look at some results. If you don't follow the expressions also, it's fine. What we proved is certain obvious things also we proved. One of them is if there are 10 users, okay, and you want all 10 to be successful 90% of the time, you need only 300 preambles. But if you have 20 users, you require like 1100 preambles. And if you have 30 users, it will jump even more. It will be like around 3000 preambles to achieve the same amount of success, 90% success. And obviously, more success I want to achieve, the number of preambles required increases exponentially. See, you can see the curve is moving exponentially, right? So more number of, you will need more and more preambles if you want to achieve higher order of success. Okay. Now this comes to the last part. So what we did was, conventionally what people did was, they used to ensure 99% success. So see this graph here, 90% success itself is requiring so many preambles, even for 10 users. Look at like 99%. 99% is requiring very high number of preambles, right? See this? To achieve 99% success, you need 4482 preambles. When there are only 10 users, of course, with 20 users, it becomes 18,000. And with 30 users, it's like 43,000 preambles. It's not so easy to generate so many preambles, right? So what we proposed, don't ensure success of all users with 99% probability, ensure success of at least all but 2. So ensure success of greater than or equal to 8 with 99% probability. That is what we proposed. Don't put event 1 to 99%, put event 3 to 99%. Then you require only 278 preambles, we showed. Okay. What is the price you pay? There will be collision. How many will collide? Most of the time it will be 2 users who is colliding, right? Because I am ensuring 8 are successful out of 10. So most of the time 2 users will collide. Okay, I pay a price like that. But see, instead of 4482 preambles, you will then require only 278 preambles, which is a 93% reduction in the number of preambles. Same thing in 20, same thing in 30, both for fixed and Poisson. Okay, we showed that if you design the system such that you are okay with 2 users failing, then you can reduce the number of preambles required. Now the question comes, then how will you make the failing users pass? We'll say we have one weapon for it, that's called repetition. Okay, what do you do to our failing students in the class? You give repeat exams, right? Same logic. Failed users, transmit again, or you give them multiple repetitions. You give all users multiple repetitions. Then you will see, if I repeat after 3 times and all, number of failed users will be limited to 1, like my original system only. So I can operate with only 10% of the preambles, but still ensure minimum number of failure by using repetition. So repetition. So how to do grant free? You can have lower number of preambles, but you can have more than 1 repetition to ensure that you have the same performance as the original system. This was one of the major results in grant free. Okay, so this is further illustration in the fixed case. Okay, so that is fixed, and this is the probability success of all users. N equal to 64 corresponds to LTE, remember. So what we showed was, if you increase it to 308, 1289, 2944, which is like 20 users, 30 users, 10 users, 20 users, 30 users, you can easily see that probability of success for 10 users is reaching around 0.9 here. With N equal to 1289, for 20 users itself, it is reaching close to 0.9. And for 30, again, it's reaching close to 0.9. If we have more preambles, but our LTE guy can support only 4 users with 90% success. But we can support much more than 4 users if you increase the number of preambles. Same you can have in per user success probability also. So the goal is, we are telling number of preambles required will be higher than what is required in LTE right now, but still it is not too high if you design it like this, designed for all but 2 users to be successful. If you design it like that, you will get good results for both fixed and Poisson case. And next question will be then, now we showed all that, right? Okay, we need only fewer preambles. Maybe LTE has 64, but if you have 300, you can support 10 users instead of 4 users. Now the biggest question will be, how will you generate such preambles? Again, they will be based on orthogonal or quasi-orthogonal sequences. And we say that they should have something called good detection properties. What do you mean by good detection? That is, if I correlate the preamble with itself, it will give me a good peak. But if I correlate the preamble with some other preamble, it should give me ideally 0 as the cross correlation value. Okay. That again, that requires a complete 2-hour session as how to build these preambles. We have done that though. I mean, we are submitting it now soon. How to do that is an open question, which we have answered now little bit in one of our papers. But what you have to think is basically grant free is send data without taking permission from the base station. So how will you do it? You will send it along with the preamble itself. What price you pay for it? You might experience collision. How do we avoid collision? By having very large set of preambles. Now, I cannot have it to be too large. So how do I design my system? I design it such that I allow 2 people to collide, but I make sure that remaining m-2 are successful. So this is the summary of the entire grant free access. All these are extremely new. Nothing is standardized. There is so much scope to do new research in all this. So this is being considered for 5G and also for NB-IoT in release 16. So I think there is they call it with a different name in NB-IoT, some predefined, pre-allocated resources based access or something like that. Okay. Now these are nothing but grant free access mechanisms only. Okay, so this is the whole new thing called grant free access. This is like what they say, like newest of the new, I can say. NOMA is already old for us, although it has not come to practice. NOMA is already old. This is now the hot cake, grant free access. And after this, towards 6G, there is another sort of access. It's called UAV based access, where your base station gets replaced by drones, basically. So that is, they are using grant free with UAV, along with UAV. That is a part of 6G communications. Okay, with that, I would like to end this session. If you have any questions on grant free access, you have 5 more minutes. Meanwhile, I can email all these slides to Mr. Mallikarjun.
Yes, dear participants, please ask if you have any questions. Sir, I have one question with respect to LTE, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, because LTE supports variable bandwidth, similar to GSM, sir, because there we say it can accommodate 8 users simultaneously.
Correct.
So,
That is
with
because
respect
8
to
users
that,
are given 8 different slots
yeah,
there.
200 kilohertz different slots, sir. With respect to that in
Correct.
LTE, so based on one particular bandwidth, how do we say how many users it can support simultaneously, sir?
Okay, so that way, minimum allocation is 12 subcarriers in LTE.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yeah.
So every time you have to allocate at least 12 subcarriers to each user. And when the smallest bandwidth in LTE is 6 such units. Okay, that is 1.08 megahertz.
Yeah.
So in the smallest LTE system, you can have 6 users at a time.
Okay.
But the amount of data rate they get will be higher than GSM, because GSM uses GMSK. But in
Correct.
LTE, I can use 16 QAM, even 64 QAM, and in that 12 subcarriers, right? On
Yeah.
each subcarrier, if I send 64 QAM, each subcarrier takes 6 bits. So 6 bits means 72 bits I can send within one symbol itself.
Okay.
So you can get very high data rate for 6 users in LTE itself. In LTE, minimum is 6 for the smallest LTE.
Means
In
one
the
resource
largest,
block is one user, sir.
yeah, one resource block is one user you can take. in the largest LTE, which is like 20 megahertz,
Yeah.
I think you have like many 20, right? So 12, roughly you have around 100 resource blocks, I think.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So you can have 100 users, strictly speaking.
Right.
But usually if you have such high bandwidth, right, you
Yes,
will
sir.
not give one to one user. You will give more than one to one user. At best, easily it can support like 20 users, 30 users per the highest 20 megahertz configuration. Easily it can support 20, 30 users at a time.
And this uplink and downlink resource blocks will be different, sir, or it will be same, sir?
They will be different. If they are
Different.
FDD, they will be different.
Ah.
If they are TDD, they will be same.
Same.
Yeah. If they are FDD, that is uplink and downlink
Yeah,
frequencies are
resource block locations will be different, sir.
different. Otherwise, they will be same.
And as of now, FTD is implemented, sir, or TDD is implemented, or both is used, sir?
In India, it's mostly TDD.
TDD.
Airtel and even Jio, they are doing TDD in India. In Western countries, it's mostly FDD.
FTD. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Any other question?
Yes, sir. I'm not finding any questions in the chat box, sir.
Uh, I'm just now sending you the slides.
Fine, sir.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. Attendance something. Okay. Yeah, last session, I agree. Last 1 hour, it is little bit advanced, but I mean, sometime you have to get exposed to this. At least some summary you will understand. The math, if you don't follow, also it's fine. But at least you got to know that something like Grand Free exists. People are trying to send preamble and data together, like Aloha. Some basics you got at least. So
Sir, this is ZF2 sequences not much included in the syllabus, no, sir. Only PN sequences we have studied so far. But
yeah, in syllabus it is not included, but from 2008 itself in LTE they are using these sequences. So you can make it like a self-study. Like I always encourage that. So ask students to read about these things. That is
ZF2
PN
sequences.
sequences, everything. As a self-study, ask them to find out what PN sequences are used in LTE. So immediately they will only come and tell, sir, they are using something called ZF2 sequence and all that. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
everyone. Okay, I think I'll end the call because I have another meeting at 2. Before that, I have to grab lunch.
Thanks,
So,
sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, sir.
no
And
problem. It
sharing
was
your
a
valuable
pleasure.
knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, dear participants, the session will be closed. I think we'll come back at 2:30 for the third session.
Okay. Thanks again. Bye. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir. Bye, sir.